Can I ask you to please recall a time when you really loved something, a movie, an album, a song, or a book, and you recommended it wholeheartedly to someone you also really liked. And you anticipated that reaction, you waited for it, and it came back, and the person hated it. So by way of introduction, that is the exact same state in which I spend every working day of the last 6 years. I teach high school math. I sell a product to a market that doesn't want it, but is forced by law to buy it. I mean, it's just a losing proposition. So there's a useful stereotype about students that I see, a useful stereotype about you all. I could give you guys Algebra 2 final exam, and I'd expect no higher than a 25% pass rate. And both of these facts say less about you or my students than they do about what we call math education in the US today. To start with, I'd like to break math down into two categories. One is computation. This is the stuff you've forgotten. For example, factoring quadratics with leading coefficient greater than 1. Okay? This stuff is also really easy to relearn, provided that you have a really strong grounding in reasoning, math reasoning. We'll call it the application of math processes to the world around us. This is hard to teach. This is what we would love students to retain, even if they don't go into mathematical fields. This is also something that, the way we teach it in the US, all but ensures they won't retain it. So I'd like to talk about why that is, why that's such a calamity for society, what we can do about it, and to close with why this is an amazing time to be a math teacher. Okay? So first, five symptoms that you're doing math reasoning wrong in your classroom. Okay? One is a lack of initiative. Your students don't self-start. You finish your lecture block and immediately you have 5 hands going up asking you to re-explain the entire thing at their desks. Students lack perseverance. They lack retention. You find yourself re-explaining concepts 3 months later, wholesale. There's an aversion to word problems, which describes 99% of my students, and then the other 1% are eagerly looking for the formula to apply in that situation. Okay? This is really destructive. David Milch, a creator of Deadwood and other amazing TV shows, has a really good description for this. He swore off creating contemporary drama, shows set in the present day, because he saw that when people fill their mind with 4 hours a day of, for example, 2.5 Men, no disrespect, it shapes the neural pathways, he said, in such a way that they expect simple problems. He called it an impatience with irresolution. You're impatient with things that don't resolve quickly. You expect sitcom-sized problems that wrap up in 22 minutes, 3 commercial breaks, and a laugh track. And I'll put it to all of you, what you already know, that no problem we're solving is that simple. I'm very concerned about this because I'm going to retire in a world that my students will run. I'm doing bad things to my own future and well-being when I teach this way. I'm here to tell you that the way our textbooks, particularly math-adopted textbooks, teach math reasoning and patient problem solving, it's functionally equivalent to turning on 2.5 Men and calling it a day. In all seriousness, here's an example from a physics textbook. It applies equally to math. Notice, first of all, here that you have exactly 3 pieces of information there, each of which will figure into a formula somewhere eventually, which the student will then compute. Okay? I believe in real life. And ask yourselves, what problem have you solved ever that was worth solving where you knew all of the given information in advance, where you didn't have a surplus of information and you had to filter it out, or you didn't have insufficient information and had to go find some? I'm sure we all agree that no problem we're solving is like that. And the textbook, I think, knows how it's hamstringing students, because watch this. This is the practice problem set. When it comes time to the actual problem set, you have problems like this right here, where we're just swapping out numbers and tweaking the context a little bit. And if the student still doesn't recognize the stamp this was molded from, it helpfully explains to you like what sample problem you can return to find the formula. Like you could literally, I mean this, pass this particular unit without knowing any physics, just knowing how to decode a textbook. That's a shame. So I can diagnose the problem a little more specifically in math. Here's a really cool problem. I like this. It's about defining steepness and slope using a ski lift. But what you have here is actually 4 separate layers. And I'm curious which of you can see the 4 separate layers, and particularly how when they're compressed together and presented to the student all at once, how that creates this impatient problem solving. I'll define them here. You have the visual, okay? You also have the mathematical structure, talking about grids, measurements, labels, points, axes, that sort of thing. You have sub-steps, which all lead to what we really want to talk about, which section is the steepest. So I hope you can see, I really hope you can see how what we're doing here is taking a compelling question, a compelling answer, but we're paving a smooth, straight path from one to the other and congratulating our students for how well they can step over the small cracks in the way. That's all we're doing here. So I want to put to you that if we can separate these in a different way and build them up with students, we can have everything we're looking for in terms of patient problem solving. So right here, I start with the visual, and I immediately ask the question, which section is the steepest? And this starts conversation because the visual is created in such a way where you can defend two answers. So we get people arguing against each other, friend versus friend, in pairs, journaling, whatever. And then eventually we realize it's getting annoying to talk about the skier in the lower left-hand side of the screen, or the skier just above the midline. And we realize how great would it be if we just had some A, B, C, and D labels to talk about them more easily. And then as we start to define like what does steepness mean, we realize it'd be nice to have some measurements to really narrow it down specifically what that means. And then and only then we throw down that mathematical structure. The math serves the conversation doesn't serve the math. And at that point, I'll put it to you that 9 out of 10 classes are good to go on the whole slope steepness thing. But if you need to, your students can then develop those sub-steps together. Do you guys see how this right here compared to that, which one creates that patient problem solving, that math reasoning? It's been obvious in my practice to me. And I'll yield the floor here for a second to Einstein, who I believe has paid his dues. He talked about the formulation of a problem being so incredibly important. And yet, in my practice, in the US here, we just give problems to students. We don't involve them in the formulation of the problem. So 90% of what I do with my 5 hours of prep time per week is to take fairly compelling elements of problems like this from my textbook and rebuild them in a way that supports math reasoning and patient problem solving. And here's how it works. I like this question. It's about a water tank. The question is, how long will it take you to fill it up, okay? First things first, we eliminate all the sub-steps. Students have to develop those. They have to formulate those. And then notice that all the information written on there is stuff you'll need. None of it's a distractor, so we lose that. Students need to decide, all right, well, does the height matter? Does the side length matter? Does the color of the valve matter? What matters here? It's such an underrepresented question in math curriculum. So now we have a water tank. How long will it take you to fill it up? And that's it. And because this is the 21st century, and we would love to talk about the real world on its own terms, not in terms of line art or clip art that you so often see in textbooks, we go out and we take a picture of it. So now we have the real deal. How long will it take it to fill it up? And then even better is we take a video of someone filling it up. And it's filling up slowly, agonizingly slowly. It's tedious. Students are looking at their watches, rolling their eyes, and they're all wondering at some point or another, man, how long is it going to take to fill up? That's how you know you've baited the hook, right? And that question off this right here is really fun for me because like the intro, I teach kids, because of my inexperience, I teach the kids that are the most remedial, all right? And I got kids who will not join a conversation about math because there's, like, someone else has the formula. Someone else knows how to work the formula better than me, so I won't talk about it. But here, every student is on the level playing field of intuition. Like, everyone's filled something up with water before. So I get kids answering the question, how long will it take? I got kids who are mathematically and conversationally intimidated joining the conversation. We put names on the board, attach them to guesses, and kids have bought in here. And then we follow the process I've described. And the best part here, or one of the better parts, is that we don't get our answer from the answer key in the back of the teacher's edition. We instead just watch the end of the movie. And that's terrifying, all right? Because the theoretical models that always work out in the answer key, the back of the teacher's edition, like that's great, but it's scary to talk about sources of error when the theoretical does not match up with the practical. But those conversations have been so valuable, among the most valuable. So I'm here to report some really fun games with students who come pre-installed with these viruses day one of the class, okay? These are kids who now, one semester in, I can put something on the board totally new, totally foreign, and they'll have a conversation about it for 3 or 4 minutes more than they would have at the start of the year, which is just so fun. We're no longer averse to word problems because we've redefined what a word problem is. We're no longer intimidated by math because we're slowly redefining what math is. This has been a lot of fun. I encourage math teachers I talk to use multimedia because it brings the real world into your classroom in high resolution and full color. To encourage student intuition for that level playing field, to ask the shortest question you possibly can and let those more specific questions come out in conversation. To let students build the problem, because Einstein said so. And to finally, in total, just be less helpful. Because the textbook is helping you in all the wrong ways. It's helping you, it's buying you out of your obligation for patient problem solving and math reasoning to be less helpful. And why this is an amazing time to be a math teacher right now is because we have the tools to create this high quality curriculum in our front pocket. It's ubiquitous and fairly cheap. And the tools to distribute it freely under open licenses has also never been cheaper or more ubiquitous. I put a video series on my blog not so long ago, and it got 6,000 views in 2 weeks. I get emails still from teachers in countries I've never visited saying, wow, yeah, we had a good conversation about that. Oh, and by the way, here's how I made your stuff better. Which, wow. I put this problem on my blog recently. You're in a grocery store, which line do you get into? The one that has 1 cart and 19 items, or the line with 4 carts and 3, 5, 2, and 1 items? And the linear modeling involved in that was some good stuff in my classroom, but it eventually got me on Good Morning America a few weeks later, which is just bizarre, right? And from all of this, I can only conclude that people, not just students, are really hungry for this. Math makes sense of the world. Math is the vocabulary for your own intuition. So I just really encourage you, whatever your stake is in education, whether you're a student, parent, teacher, policymaker, whatever, just insist on better math curriculum. We need more patient problem solvers. Thank you.
Now, I wanted to start with the question, when was the last time you were called childish? For kids like me, being called childish can be a frequent occurrence. Every time we make irrational demands, exhibit irresponsible behavior, or display any other signs of being normal American citizens, we are called childish. Which really bothers me. After all, take a look at these events. Imperialism and colonization, world wars, George W. Bush. Ask yourself, who's responsible? Adults. Now, what have kids done? Well, Anne Frank touched millions with her powerful account of the Holocaust. Ruby Bridges helped to end segregation in the United States. And most recently, Charlie Simpson helped to raise 120,000 pounds for Haiti on his little bike. So as you can see evidenced by such examples, age has absolutely nothing to do with it. The traits the word childish addresses are seen so often in adults that we should abolish this age discriminatory word when it comes to criticizing behavior associated with irresponsibility and irrational thinking. Thank you. Then again, who's to say that certain types of irrational thinking aren't exactly what the world needs? Maybe you've had grand plans before, but stopped yourself thinking, that's impossible, or that costs too much, or that won't benefit me. For better or worse, sweet kids aren't hampered as much when it comes to thinking about reasons why not to do things. Kids can be full of inspiring aspirations and hopeful thinking, like my wish that no one went hungry or that everything were free, kind of utopia. How many of you still dream like that and believe in the possibilities? Sometimes a knowledge of history and the past failures of utopian ideals can be a burden, because you know that if everything were free, then the food stocks would become depleted and scarce and lead to chaos. On the other hand, we kids still dream about perfection. And that's a good thing, because in order to make anything a reality, you have to dream about it first. In many ways, our audacity to imagine helps push the boundaries of possibility. For instance, the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, Washington, my home state, yoo-hoo, Washington, has a program called Kids Design Glass, and kids draw their own ideas for glass art. Now, the resident artists said that they got some of their best ideas from the program because kids don't think about the limitations of how hard it can be to blow glass into certain shapes. They just think of good ideas. Now, when you think of glass, you might think of colorful Chihuly designs or maybe Italian vases, but kids challenge glass artists to go beyond that, into the realm of broken-hearted snakes and bacon boys, who you can see as meat vision. Now, our inherent wisdom doesn't have to be insider's knowledge. Kids already do a lot of learning from adults, and we have a lot to share. I think that adults should start learning from kids. Now, I do most of my speaking in front of an education crowd, teachers and students, and I like this analogy. It shouldn't just be the teacher at the head of the classroom telling students, do this, do that. The students should teach their teachers. Learning between grown-ups and kids should be reciprocal. The reality, unfortunately, is a little different, and it has a lot to do with trust, or a lack of it. Now, if you don't trust someone, you place restrictions on them, right? If I doubt my older sister's ability to pay back the 10% interest I established on her last loan, I'm going to withhold her ability to get more money from me until she pays it back. True story, by the way. Now, adults seem to have a prevalently restrictive attitude towards kids, from every don't do that, don't do this in the school handbook, to restrictions on school internet use. As history points out, regimes become oppressive when they're fearful about keeping control. And although adults may not be quite at the level of totalitarian regimes, kids have no or very little say in making the rules, when really the attitude should be reciprocal, meaning that the adult population should learn and take into account the wishes of the younger population. Now, what's even worse than restriction is that adults often underestimate kids' abilities. We love challenges, but when expectations are low, trust me, we will sing to them. My own parents had anything but low expectations for me and my sister. Okay, so they didn't tell us to become doctors or lawyers or anything like that, but my dad did read to us about Aristotle and pioneer germ fighters when lots of other kids were hearing the wheels on the bus go round and round. Well, we heard that one too, but pioneer germ fighters totally rules. I loved to write from the age of 4, and when I was 6, my mom bought me my own laptop equipped with Microsoft Word. Thank you, Bill Gates, and thank you, Mom. I wrote over 300 short stories on that little laptop, and I wanted to get published. Instead of just scoffing at this heresy that a kid wanted to get published, or saying, wait until you're older, my parents were really supportive. Many publishers were not quite so encouraging. One large children's publisher ironically saying that they didn't work with children. Might want a children's publisher not working with children. I don't know, you're kind of alienating large client there. Now, one publisher, Action Publishing, was willing to take that leap and trust me and to listen to what I had to say. They published my first book, Flying Fingers, you see it here, and from there on, it's gone to speaking at hundreds of schools, keynoting to thousands of educators, and finally today, speaking to you. I appreciate your attention today because to show that you truly care, you listen. But there's a problem with this rosy picture of kids being so much better than adults. Kids grow up and become adults just like you. Or just like you? Really? The goal is not to turn kids into your kind of adult, but rather better adults than you have been, which may be a little challenging considering your guys' credentials. But the way progress happens is because new generations and new eras grow and develop and become better than the previous ones. It's the reason we're not in the dark ages anymore. No matter your position or place in life, it is imperative to create opportunities for children so that we can grow up to blow you away. Adults and fellow Tedsters, you need to listen and learn from kids, and trust us and expect more from us. You must lend an ear today because we are the leaders of tomorrow, which means we're going to be taking care of you in your old and senile. No, just kidding. Actually, no, really, we are going to be the next generation, the one who will bring this world forward. And in case you don't think that this really has meaning for you, remember that cloning is possible, and that involves going through childhood again, in which case you will want to be heard just like my generation. Now, the world needs opportunities for new leaders and new ideas. Kids need opportunities to lead and succeed. Are you ready to make the match? Because the world's problems shouldn't be the human family's heirloom. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
This is the exact moment that I started creating something called Tinkering School. Tinkering School is a place where kids can pick up sticks and hammers and other dangerous objects and be trusted. Trusted not to hurt themselves and trusted not to hurt others. Tinkering School doesn't follow a set curriculum and there are no tests. We're not trying to teach anybody any specific thing. When the kids arrive, they're confronted with lots of stuff. Wood and nails and rope and wheels and lots of tools, real tools. It's a 6-day immersive experience for the kids. And within that context, we can offer the kids time, something that seems in short supply in their overscheduled lives. Our goal is to ensure that they leave with a better sense of how to make things than when they arrived, and the deep internal realization that you can figure things out by fooling around. Nothing ever turns out as planned, ever. And the kids soon learn that all projects go awry and become at ease with the idea that every step in a project is a step closer to sweet success or gleeful calamity. We start from doodles and sketches, and sometimes we make real plans, and sometimes we just start building. Building is at the heart of the experience, hands-on, deeply immersed, and fully committed to the problem at hand. Robin and I, acting as collaborators, keep the landscape of the projects tilted towards completion. Success is in the doing, and failures are celebrated and analyzed. Problems become puzzles, and obstacles disappear. When faced with particularly difficult setbacks or complexities, a really interesting behavior emerges. Decoration. Decoration of the unfinished project is a kind of conceptual incubation. From these interludes come deep insights and amazing new approaches to solving the problems that had them frustrated just moments before. All materials are available for use, even those mundane, hateful plastic grocery bags can become a bridge stronger than anyone imagined. And the things that they build amaze even themselves.
3, 2, 1, go!
A roller coaster built by 7-year-olds. Thank you. It's been a great pleasure.
Khan Academy is most known for its collection of videos. So before I go any farther, let me show you a little bit of a montage.
So the hypotenuse is now going to be 5. This animal's fossils are only found in this area of South America, a nice clean band here, and this part of Africa. We could integrate over the surface, and the notation usually is a capital sigma. National Assembly, they create the Committee of Public Safety, which sounds like a very nice committee. Notice this is an aldehyde, and it's an alcohol. Start differentiating into effector and memory cells. A galaxy. Hey, there's another galaxy. Oh, look, there's another galaxy. And for dollars is their 30 million plus the $20 million from the American manufacturer. If this does not blow your mind, then you have no emotion.
We now have on the order of 2,200 videos covering everything from basic arithmetic all the way to vector calculus and some of the stuff that you saw up there. We have a million students a month using the site, watching on the order of 100 to 200,000 videos a day. But what we're going to talk about in this is how we're going to the next level. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about really just how I got started. And some of y'all might know, about 5 years ago, I was an analyst at a hedge fund, and I was in Boston, and I was tutoring my cousins in New Orleans remotely. And I started putting the first YouTube videos up really just as kind of a nice to have, just kind of a supplement for my cousins, something that might, give them a refresher or something. And as soon as I put those first YouTube videos up, something interesting happened. Actually, a bunch of interesting things happened. The first was the feedback from my cousins. They told me that they preferred me on YouTube than in person. And once you get over the backhanded nature of that, there was actually something very profound there. They were saying that they preferred the automated version of their cousin to their cousin. At first it's very unintuitive, but when you actually think about it from their point of view, it makes a ton of sense. You have this situation where now they can pause and repeat their cousin. Now they can, without feeling like they're wasting my time. They could, if they have to review something that they should have learned a couple of weeks ago or maybe a couple of years ago, they don't have to be embarrassed and ask their cousin. They can just watch those videos. If they're bored, they can go ahead. They can watch it at their own time, at their own pace. And probably the least appreciated, aspect of this is the notion that the very first time that you're trying to get your brain around a new concept, the very last thing you need is another human being saying, do you understand this? And that's what was happening with the interaction with my cousins before, and now they could just do it kind of in the intimacy of their own room. The other thing that happened is, I put them on YouTube just for the, I saw no reason to make it private, so I let other people watch it, and then people started stumbling on it, and I started getting some comments and some letters and all sorts of kind of feedback from random people around the world, and these are just a few. This is actually from one of the original calculus videos, and someone wrote just on YouTube, it was a YouTube comment, "First time I smiled doing a derivative." And let's pause here. This person did a derivative, and then they smiled. And then in response to that same comment, this is on the thread, you could go on YouTube and look at these comments, someone else wrote, "Same thing here. I actually got a natural high and a good mood for the entire day. Since I remember seeing all of this matrix text in class, and here I'm all like, I know Kung Fu." And we got a lot of feedback along those lines. It's clearly it was helping people. But then as the viewership kept growing and kept growing, I started getting letters from people, and it was starting to become clear that it was actually more than just a nice to have. This is just an excerpt from one of those letters. "My 12-year-old son has autism and has had a terrible time with math. We have tried everything, viewed everything, bought everything. We stumbled on your video on decimals, and it got through. Then we went on to the dreaded fractions. Again, he got it. We could not believe it. He is so excited." And so you can imagine, here I was, an analyst at a hedge fund. It was very strange for me to do something of social value. I was excited, so I kept going. And then other things started to dawn on me. That not only would it help my cousins right now, or these people who were sending letters, but it could maybe that this content will never go old, that it could help their kids or their grandkids. If Isaac Newton had done YouTube videos on calculus, I wouldn't have to. Assuming he was good. We don't know. The other thing that happened, and, even at this point, I said, okay, maybe it's a good supplement, it's good for motivated students, it's good for maybe homeschoolers, but I didn't think it would be something that would somehow penetrate the classroom. But then I started getting letters from teachers, and the teachers would write saying, we've used your videos to flip the classroom. You've given the lectures. So now what we do, and this could actually happen in every classroom in America tomorrow, what I do is I assign the lectures for homework, and what used to be homework, I now have the students doing in the classroom. And I want to pause here for I want to pause here for a second because there's a couple of interesting things. One, when those teachers are doing that, there's the obvious benefit. There's the benefit that now their students can enjoy the videos in the way that my cousins did. They can pause, repeat at their own pace, at their own time. But the more interesting thing, and this is the unintuitive thing when you talk about technology in the classroom, by removing the one-size-fits-all lecture from the classroom and letting students have a self-paced lecture at home, and then when you go to the classroom, letting them do work, having the teacher walk around, having the peers actually be able to interact with each other, these teachers have used technology to humanize the classroom. They took a fundamentally dehumanizing experience, a bunch of 30 kids with their fingers on their lips, not allowed to interact with each other. A teacher, no matter how good, has to give this kind of one-size-fits-all lecture to 30 students, blank faces, slightly antagonistic, and now it's a human experience. Now they're actually interacting with each other. So once the Khan Academy kind of, I quit my job and we turned into a real organization, we're a not-for-profit, the question is, how do we take this to the next level? How do we take what those teachers were doing to their natural conclusion? And so what I'm showing over here, these are actual exercises that I started writing for my cousins. The ones I started were much more primitive. This is a kind of a more competent version of it. But the paradigm here is we'll generate as many questions as you need until you get that concept, until you get 10 in a row. And the Khan Academy videos are there. You get hints, the actual steps for that problem if you don't know how to do it. But the paradigm here, it seems like a very simple thing, 10 in a row, you move on. But it's fundamentally different than what's happening in classrooms right now. In a traditional classroom, you have a couple of homework lecture, and then you have a snapshot exam. And that exam, whether you get a 70%, an 80%, a 90%, or a 95%, the class moves on to the next topic. And even that 95% student, what was the 5% they didn't know? Maybe they didn't know what happens when you raise something to the 0th power. And then you go build on that in the next concept. That's analogous to, imagine learning to ride a bicycle. And I give you a bicycle, maybe I give you a lecture ahead of time, and I give you that bicycle for 2 weeks, and then I come back after 2 weeks, and I say, well, let's see, you're having trouble taking left turns, you can't quite stop. You're an 80% bicyclist. So I put a big C stamp on your forehead, and then I say, here's a unicycle. But as ridiculous as that sounds, that's exactly what's happening in our classrooms right now. And the idea is, you fast forward and good students start failing algebra all of a sudden and start failing calculus all of a sudden, despite it being smart, despite having good teachers, and it's usually because they had these Swiss cheese gaps that kept building throughout their foundation. So our model is learn math the way you would learn anything, like the way you would learn a bicycle. Stay on that bicycle. Fall off that bicycle. Do it as long as necessary until you have mastery. The traditional model, it penalizes you for experimentation and failure, but it does not expect mastery. We encourage you to experiment. We encourage you to failure, but we do expect mastery. This is just another one of the modules. This is trigonometry. This is shifting and reflecting functions. And they all fit together. We have about 90 of these right now. And you could go to the site right now. It's all free, not trying to sell anything. But the general idea is that they all fit into this knowledge map. That top node right there, that's literally single-digit addition. It's like 1 + 1 is equal to 2. And the paradigm is, once you get 10 in a row on that, then it keeps forwarding you to more and more advanced modules. So if you keep... this is further down the knowledge map, we're getting into more advanced arithmetic. Further down, you start getting into pre-algebra and early algebra. Further down, you start getting into algebra 1, algebra 2, a little bit of pre-calculus. And the idea is from this, we can actually teach everything. Well, everything that can be taught in this type of a framework. So you can imagine, and this is what we are working on, is from this knowledge map, you have logic, you have computer programming, you have grammar, you have genetics, all based off of that core of, okay, if you know this and that, now you're ready for this next concept. Now, that can work well for an individual learner, and I encourage one for you to do it with your kids, but I also encourage everyone in the audience to do it yourself. It'll change what happens at the dinner table. But what we want to do is use the natural conclusion of the flipping of the classroom that those early teachers had emailed me about. And so what I'm showing you here, this is actually data from a pilot in the Los Altos School District where they took 2 5th grade classes and 2 7th grade classes and completely gutted their old math curriculum. These kids aren't using textbooks, they're not getting one-size-fits-all lectures, they're doing Khan Academy, they're doing that software for roughly half of their math class. And I want to make it clear, we don't view this as the complete math education. What it does is, and this is what's happening in Los Altos, it frees up time. This is the blocking and tackling, making sure you know how to do a system of equations, and it frees up time for the simulations, for the games, for the mechanics, for the robot building, for the estimating how high that hill is based on its shadow. And so the paradigm is the teacher walks in every day, every kid works at their own pace, and a teacher this is actually a live dashboard from Los Altos School District, and they look at this dashboard. Every row is a student. Every column is one of those concepts. Green means the student's already proficient. Blue means that they're working on it, no need to worry. Red means they're stuck. And what the teacher does is literally just says, let me intervene on the red kids. Or even better, let me get one of the green kids who are already proficient in that concept to be the first line of attack and actually tutor their peer. Now, I kind of come from a very data-centric reality, so we don't want that teacher to even go and intervene and have to ask the kid awkward questions. Oh, what do you not understand, or what do you do understand, and all of the rest. So our paradigm is to really arm the teachers with as much data as possible, really data that in almost any other field is expected if you're in finance or marketing or manufacturing, and so the teachers can actually diagnose what's wrong with the students so that they can make their interaction as productive as possible. So now the teachers know exactly what the students have been up to, how long they've been spending every day, what videos have they been watching, when did they pause the videos, what did they stop watching, what exercises are they using, what have they been focused on. The outer circle shows what the exercises they're focused on, the inner circle shows the videos they're focused on. And the data gets pretty granular, so you can actually see the exact problems that the student got right or wrong. Red is wrong, blue is right. The leftmost question is the first question that the student attempted. They watched the video right over there. And then you could see eventually they were able to get 10 in a row. It's almost like you can almost see them learning over those last 10 problems. They also got faster. The height is how long it took them. So, when you talk about self-paced learning, it makes sense for everyone. In education speak, differentiated learning. But it's kind of crazy what happens when you actually see it in a classroom. Because every time we've done this, in every classroom we've done, over and over again, if you go 5 days into it, there's a group of kids who've raced ahead and there's a group of kids who are a little bit slower. And in a traditional model, if you did a snapshot assessment, you say, oh, these are the gifted kids, these are the slow kids. Maybe they should be tracked differently. Maybe we should put them in different classes. But when you let every student work at their own pace, and we see it over and over and over again, you see students who took a little bit extra time on one concept or the other, but once they get through that concept, they just race ahead. And so the same kids that you thought were slow 6 weeks ago, you now would think are gifted. And we're seeing it over and over and over again. And it makes you really wonder kind of how much all of the labels, maybe a lot of us have benefited from, were really just due to a coincidence of time. Now, as valuable as something like this is in a district like Los Altos, our goal is to use technology to humanize, not just in Los Altos, but kind of on a global scale, what's happening in education. And actually, that kind of brings an interesting point, is that, a lot of the effort in humanizing the classroom is focused on student-to-teacher ratios. In our mind, the relevant metric is student to valuable human time with the teacher ratio. So in a traditional model, most of the teacher's time is spent doing lectures and grading tests and whatnot. Maybe 5% of their time is actually sitting next to students and actually working with them. Now 100% of their time is. So once again, using technology, not just flipping the classroom, you're humanizing the classroom, I'd argue, by a factor of 5 or 10. And as valuable as it is in Los Altos, imagine what that does to the adult learner who's embarrassed to go back and learn stuff that they should have known before going back to college. Imagine what it does to a street kid in Calcutta who has to help his family during the day, and that's the reason why he or she can't go to school. Now they can spend 2 hours a day and remediate or get up to speed and not feel embarrassed about what they do or don't know. Now imagine what happens where, we talked about the peers teaching each other inside of a classroom, but this is all one system. There's no reason why you can't have that peer-to-peer tutoring beyond that one classroom. Imagine what happens if that student in Calcutta all of a sudden can tutor your son, or your son can tutor that kid in Calcutta. And I think what you'll see emerging is this notion of a global one-world classroom. And that's essentially what we're trying to build. Thank you.
I'll ask you a brief question. We got a long time.
Okay.
I've seen some things you're doing in the system that have to do with motivation and feedback, energy points, merit badges. Tell me what you're thinking there.
Oh yeah, no, we have an awesome team working on it. It's not, and I have to make it clear, it's not just me anymore. I'm still doing all the videos. We have a kind of a rock star team doing the software. Yeah, we've put a bunch of game mechanics in there where you get these badges. We're going to start having leaderboards by areas, and you get points. And it's actually been pretty interesting. Just the wording of the badging or how many points you get for doing something, we see on a system-wide basis like tens of thousands of like 5th graders or 6th graders going one direction or another depending on what badge you give them.
And the collaboration you're doing with Los Altos, how did that come about?
Yeah, no, Los Altos has been it was kind of crazy. They once again, I didn't expect it to be used in classrooms. Someone from their board came and said, oh, what would you do if you had carte blanche in a classroom? And I said, well, I would just, every student work at their own pace on something like this. We'd give a dashboard, and they said, oh, this is kind of radical. We have to think about it. And me and the rest of the team were like, oh, they're never going to want to do this. But literally the next day, they're like, can you start in 2 weeks? And so
so it's fifth grade math is where that's going on right now?
It's 2 5th grade classes and 2 7th grade classes. And I think they're doing it at the district level. And I think what they're excited about is they can now follow these kids. It's not an only in-school thing. I mean, we've even, on Christmas, we saw some of the kids were doing, and we can track everything. So they can actually track them as they go through the entire district, through the summers, as they go from one teacher to the next. You have this continuity of data that even at the district level they can see.
So some of those views we saw were for the teacher to go in and track actually what's going on with those kids. So you're getting feedback on those teacher views to see what they think they need?
Oh yeah, actually most of those were kind of specs by the teachers. We made some of those for students so they could see their data, but we have a very tight design loop with the teachers themselves, and they're literally saying, hey, this is nice, but I like that focus graph. A lot of the teachers said, I have a feeling that a lot of the kids are jumping around and not focusing on one topic, so we made that focus diagram for them. So it's all been teacher driven. It's been pretty crazy.
Is this ready for prime time? Do you think a lot of classes next school year should try this thing out?
Yeah, it's ready. We got 1 million people on the site already, so we can handle a few more, and no reason why it really can't happen in every classroom in America tomorrow.
And the vision of the tutoring thing, the idea there is if I'm confused about a topic, somehow right in user interface, I'd find people who are volunteering, maybe see their reputation, and I could schedule and connect up with those people.
Absolutely, and this is something that I recommend everyone in this audience to do is those dashboards that teachers have, you can go log in right now and you can essentially become a coach for your kids, your nephews, your cousins, or maybe some kids at the Boys and Girls Club. And yeah, you can start becoming a mentor or tutor really immediately, but yeah, it's all there.
Well, it's amazing. I think you've just got a glimpse of the future of education. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I have been teaching for a long time, and in doing so have acquired a body of knowledge about kids and learning that I really wish more people would understand about the potential of students. In 1931, my grandmother, about left for you guys over here, graduated from the 8th grade. She went to school to get the information because that's where the information lived. It was in the books, it was inside the teacher's head, and she needed to go there to get the information because that's how you learned. Fast forward a generation, this is the one-room schoolhouse, Oak Grove, where my father went to a one-room schoolhouse, and he again had to travel to the school to get the information from the teacher, stored in the only portable memory he has, which is inside his own head, and take it with him, because that is how information was being transported from teacher to student and then used in the world. When I was a kid, we had a set of encyclopedias at my house. It was purchased the year I was born, and it was extraordinary because I did not have to wait to go to the library to get to the information. The information was inside my house, and it was awesome. This was different than either generation had experienced before, and it changed the way I interacted with information, even at just a small level, but the information was closer to me. I could get access to it. In the time that passes between when I was a kid in high school and when I started teaching, we really see the advent of the internet. Right about the time that the internet gets going as an educational tool, I take off from Wisconsin and move to Kansas, small town Kansas, where I had an opportunity to teach in a lovely small town, rural Kansas school district, where I was teaching my favorite subject, American government. My first year, super gung-ho, going to teach American government, loved the political system. Kids in the 12th grade, not exactly all that enthusiastic about the American government system. Year 2, learned a few things, had to change my tactic, and I put in front of them an authentic experience that allowed them to learn for themselves. I didn't tell them what to do or how to do it. I posed a problem in front of them, which was to put on an election form for their own community. They produced flyers, they called offices, they checked schedules, they were meeting with secretaries, they produced an election form booklet for the entire town to learn more about their candidates. They invited everyone into the school for an evening of conversation about government and politics and, whether or not the streets were done well, and really have this robust experiential learning. The older teachers, more experienced, looked at me and went, "Oh, there she is, that's so cute. She's trying to get that done. She doesn't know what she's in for." But I knew that the kids would show up, and I believed it, and I told them every week what I expected out of them. And that night, all 90 kids, dressed appropriately, doing their job, owning it. I had to just sit and watch. It was theirs. It was experiential. It was authentic. It meant something to them, and they will step up. From Kansas, I moved on to lovely Arizona, where I taught in Flagstaff for a number of years, this time with middle school students. Luckily, I didn't have to teach them American government, could teach the more exciting topic of geography. And again, thrilled to learn. But what was interesting about this position I found myself in Arizona was I had this really extraordinarily eclectic group of kids to work with in a truly public school, and we got to have these moments where we would get these opportunities. And one opportunity was we got to go and meet Paul Rusesabagina, which is the gentleman that the movie Hotel Rwanda is based after, and he was going to speak at the high school next door to us. We could walk there. We didn't even have to pay for the buses. There was no expense cost. Perfect field trip. The problem then becomes, how do you take 7th and 8th graders to a talk about genocide and deal with the subject in a way that is responsible and respectful and they know what to do with it? And so we chose to look at Paul Rusesabagina as an example of a gentleman who singularly used his life to do something positive. I then challenged the kids to identify someone in their own life or in their own story or in their own world that they could identify that had done a similar thing. I asked them to produce a little movie about it. It's the first time we'd done this. Nobody really knew how to make these little movies on the computer, but they were into it. And I asked them to put their own voice over it. It was the most awesome moment of revelation that when you ask kids to use their own voice and ask them to speak for themselves, what they're willing to share. The last question of the assignment is, how do you plan to use your life to positively impact other people? The things that kids will say when you ask them and take the time to listen is extraordinary. Fast forward to Pennsylvania, where I find myself today. I teach at the Science Leadership Academy, which is a partnership school between the Franklin Institute and the School District of Philadelphia. We are a 9 through 12 public school, but we do school quite differently. I moved there primarily to be part of a learning environment that validated the way that I knew that kids learned, and that really wanted to investigate what was possible when you were willing to kind of let go of some of the paradigms of the past, of information scarcity when my grandmother was in school and when my father was in school, and even when I was in school, into a moment where we have information surplus. And so what do you do when the information is all around you? Why do you have kids come to school if they no longer have to come there to get the information? In Pennsylvania, we have, in Philadelphia, we have a one-to-one laptop program, so the kids are bringing in laptops with them every day, taking them home, getting access to information. And here's the thing that you need to get comfortable with when you've given the tool to acquire information to students, is that you have to be comfortable with this idea of allowing kids to fail as part of the learning process. We deal right now in the educational landscape with just an infatuation with the culture of one right answer that can be properly bubbled on the average multiple choice test, and I am here to share with you, it is not learning. That is the absolute wrong thing to ask. To tell kids to never be wrong, to ask them to always have the right answer, doesn't allow them to learn. So we did this project, and this is one of the artifacts of the project. I almost never show them off because of the issue of the idea of failure. My students produced these infographics as a result of a unit that we decided to do at the end of the year, responding to the oil spill. I asked them to take the examples that we were seeing of the infographics that existed in a lot of mass media, and take a look at what were the interesting components of it, and produce one for themselves of a different man-made disaster from American history, and they had certain criteria to do it. They were a little uncomfortable with it because we'd never done this before, and they didn't know exactly how to do it. They can talk, they are very smooth, and they can write very, very well, but asking them to communicate ideas in a different way was a little uncomfortable for them. But I gave them the room to just do the thing. Go create, go figure it out. Let's see what we can do. And the student that persistently turns out the best visual product did not disappoint. This was done in like 2 or 3 days. And this is the work of the student that consistently did it. When I sat the students down, I said, who's got the best one? And they immediately went, there it is. Didn't read anything. There it is. And I said, well, what makes it great? And they were like, oh, the design's good, and he's using good color, and there's some, and they went through we processed out loud, and I said, go read it. And they're like, oh, that one wasn't so awesome. And then we went to another one. He didn't have good visuals, but had great information, and spent an hour talking about the learning process, because it wasn't about whether or not it was perfect or whether or not it was what I could create. It asked them to create for themselves. And it allowed them to fail, process, learn from, and when we do another round of this in my class this year, they will do better this time. Because learning has to include an amount of failure, because failure is instructional in the process. There are a million pictures that I could click through here and had to choose carefully, this is one of my favorites, of students learning, of what learning can look like in a landscape where we let go of the idea that kids have to come to school to get the information, but instead ask them what they can do with it. Ask them really interesting questions. They will not disappoint. Ask them to go to places, to see things for themselves, to actually experience the learning, to play, to inquire. This is one of my favorite photos because this was taken on Tuesday when I asked the students to go to the polls. This is Robbie, and this was his first day of voting, and he wanted to share that with everybody and do that. But this is learning too, because we asked them to go out into real spaces. The main point is that if we continue to look at education as if it's about coming to school to get the information and not about experiential learning, empowering student voice, and embracing failure, we're missing the mark. And everything that everybody is talking about today isn't possible if we keep having an educational system that does not value these qualities, because we won't get there with a standardized test, and we won't get there with a culture of one right answer. We know how to do this better, and it's time to do better.
Well, if President Obama invited me to be the next czar of mathematics, then I would have a suggestion for him that I think would vastly improve the mathematics education in this country. And it would be easy to implement and inexpensive. The mathematics curriculum that we have is based on a foundation of arithmetic and algebra, and everything we learn after that is building up towards one subject. And at the top of that pyramid, it's calculus. And I'm here to say that I think that that is the wrong summit of the pyramid. That the correct summit that all of our students, every high school graduate should know, should be statistics, probability, and statistics. I mean, don't get me wrong, calculus is an important subject. It's one of the great products of the human mind. The laws of nature are written in the language of calculus. And every student who studies math, science, engineering, economics, they should definitely learn calculus by the end of their freshman year of college. But I'm here to say, as a professor of mathematics, that very few people actually use calculus in a conscious, meaningful way in their day-to-day lives. On the other hand, statistics, that's a subject that you could and should use on a daily basis, right? It's risk, it's reward, it's randomness, it's understanding data. I think if our students, if our high school students, if all of the American citizens knew about probability and statistics, we wouldn't be in the economic mess that we're in today. Not only that, if it's taught properly, it can be a lot of fun. I mean, probability and statistics, it's the mathematics of games and gambling. It's analyzing trends. It's predicting the future. Look, the world has changed from analog to digital. And it's time for our mathematics curriculum to change from analog to digital, from the more classical continuous mathematics to the more modern discrete mathematics, the mathematics of uncertainty, of randomness, of data, in that being probability and statistics. In summary, instead of our students learning about the techniques of calculus, I think it would be far more significant if all of them knew what 2 standard deviations from the mean means, and I mean it. Thank you very much.
I was here 4 years ago, and I remember at the time that the talks weren't put online. I think they were given to Tedsters in a box set of DVDs, which they put on their shelves where they are now. And actually, Chris called me a week after I'd given my talk and said, "We're going to start putting them online. Could we put yours online?" I said, "Sure." And 4 years later, as I said, it's been seen by it's been downloaded 4 million times. So I suppose you could multiply that by 20 or something to get the number of people who've seen it. And as Chris says, there is a hunger for videos of me. You know. Don't you feel? So this whole event has been an elaborate build-up to me doing another one for you, so here it is. Al Gore spoke at the TED conference I spoke at 4 years ago and talked about the climate crisis, and I referenced that at the end of my last talk. So I want to pick up from there, because I only had 18 minutes, frankly. And so as I was saying, you see, he's right. I mean, there is a major climate crisis, obviously, and I think if people don't believe it, they should get out more. But I believe there's a second climate crisis, which is as severe, which has the same origins, and that we have to deal with the same urgency. And I mean by this, and you may say, by the way, look, I'm good. You know, I have one climate crisis. I don't really need the second one. But this is a crisis of not natural resources, though I believe that's true, but a crisis of human resources. I believe fundamentally, as many speakers have said during the past few days, that we make very poor use of our talents. Very many people go through their whole lives having no real sense of what their talents may be, or if they have any to speak of. I meet all kinds of people who don't think they're really good at anything. Actually, I kind of divide the world into two groups now. Jeremy Bentham, the great utilitarian philosopher, once spiked this argument. You know, he said there are two types of people in this world: those who divide the world into two types, and those who do not. Well, well, I do. And I meet all kinds of people who don't enjoy what they do. They simply go through their lives getting on with it. They get no great pleasure from what they do. They endure it rather than enjoy it and wait for the weekend. But I also meet people who love what they do and couldn't imagine doing anything else. If you said to them, don't do this anymore, they'd wonder what you were talking about. Because it isn't what they do, it's who they are. They say, but this is me. You know, it would be foolish for me to abandon this because it speaks to my most authentic self. And it's not true of enough people. In fact, on the contrary, I think it's still true of a minority of people. And I think there are many possible explanations for it. And high among them is education. Because education, in a way, dislocates very many people from their natural talents. And human resources are like natural resources. They're often buried deep. You have to go looking for them. They're not just lying around on the surface. You have to create the circumstances where they show themselves. And you might imagine education would be the way that happens, but too often it's not. Every education system in the world is being reformed at the moment, and it's not enough. Reform is no use anymore, because that's simply improving a broken model. What we need, and the word's been used many times during the course of the past few days, is not evolution, but a revolution in education. This has to be transformed into something else. One of the real challenges is to innovate fundamentally in education. Innovation is hard because it means doing something that people don't find very easy for the most part. It means challenging what we take for granted, things that we think are obvious. The great problem for reform or transformation is the tyranny of common sense. Things that people think, well, they can't be done any other way because that's the way it's done. I came across a great quote recently from Abraham Lincoln, who I thought you'd be pleased to have quoted at this point. He said this in December 1862 to the second annual meeting of Congress. I ought to explain that I have no idea what was happening at the time. We don't teach American history in Britain. We suppress it. You know, this is our policy, so... So no doubt something fascinating is happening in December 1862, which the Americans among us will be aware of. But he said this: the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. I love that. Not rise to it, rise with it. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country. I love that word, disenthrall. You know what he means? That there are ideas that all of us are enthralled to, which we simply take for granted as the natural order of things, the way things are. And many of our ideas have been formed not to meet the circumstances of this century, but to cope with the circumstances of previous centuries. But our minds are still hypnotized by them. And we have to disenthrall ourselves of some of them. Now, doing this is easier said than done. It's very hard to know, by the way, what it is you take for granted. And the reason is that you take it for granted. So let me ask you something you may take for granted. How many of you here are over the age of 25? That's not what I think you take for granted. I'm sure you're familiar with that already. But are there any people here under the age of 25? Great. Now, those over 25, could you put your hands up if you're wearing a wristwatch? Now, that's a great deal of us, isn't it? Ask a room full of teenagers the same thing. Teenagers do not wear wristwatches. I don't mean they can't or they're not allowed to, they just often choose not to. And the reason is, you see, that we were brought up in a pre-digital culture, those of us over 25, and so for us, if you want to know the time, you have to wear something to tell it. Kids now live in a world which is digitized, and the time for them is everywhere. They see no reason to do this. And by the way, you don't need to do it either, it's just that you've always done it, and you carry on doing it. My daughter never wears a watch. My daughter Kate, who's 20, she doesn't see the point. You know, as she says, you know, like, it's a single-function device. You know, like how lame is that? You know, and I say, no, it tells the date as well. You know, it has multiple functions. But you see, there are things we're enthralled to in education. Let me give you a couple of examples. One of them is the idea of linearity. That it starts here, and you go through a track, and if you do everything right, you will end up set for the rest of your life. Everybody who's spoken at TED has told us implicitly or sometimes explicitly a different story. That life is not linear, it's organic. We create our lives symbiotically as we explore our talents in relation to the circumstances they help to create for us. But you know, we have become obsessed with this linear narrative. And probably the pinnacle for education is getting you to college. I think we are obsessed with getting people to college. Certain sorts of college. I don't mean you shouldn't go to college, but not everybody needs to go, and not everybody needs to go now. Maybe they go later, not right away. I was up in San Francisco a while ago doing a book signing. There was this guy buying a book. He was in his 30s, and I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "I'm a fireman." And I said, "How long have you been a fireman?" He said, "Always. I've always been a fireman." And I said, "Well, when did you decide?" He said, "As a kid." He said, "Actually, it was a problem for me at school, because at school, everybody wanted to be a fireman." He said, "But I wanted to be a fireman." You know, and he said, "When I got to the senior year of school, my teachers didn't take it seriously. This one teacher didn't take it seriously." He said, "I was throwing my life away if that's all I chose to do with it. That I should go to college, I should become a professional person, I had great potential, and I was wasting my talent to do that." And he said it was humiliating, because he said it in front of the whole class, and I really felt dreadful. But it's what I wanted. And as soon as I left school, I applied to the fire service, and I was accepted. And he said, "You know, I was thinking about that guy recently, just a few minutes ago when you were speaking about this teacher." He said, "Because 6 months ago, I saved his life." He said he was in a car wreck, and I pulled him out, gave him CPR, and I saved his wife's life as well. He said, "I think he thinks better of me now." You know what I mean? Human communities depend upon a diversity of talent, not a singular conception of ability. And at the heart of our challenges, at the heart of the challenge is to reconstitute our sense of ability and of intelligence. This linearity thing is a problem. When I arrived in LA about 9 years ago, I came across a policy statement, very well intentioned, which said college begins in kindergarten. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. If we had time, I could go into this, but we don't. Kindergarten begins in kindergarten. A friend of mine once said, you know, a 3-year-old is not half a 6-year-old. They're 3. But as we just heard in this last session, there's such competition now to get into kindergarten, to get to the right kindergarten, that people are being interviewed for it at 3. Kids sitting in front of unimpressed panels, you know, with their resumes. Flicking through it, saying, "What, this is it?" You've been around for 36 months, and this is it. You know, you've achieved nothing. I mean, spent the first 6 months breastfeeding, what I can say. It's outrageous as a conception, but it tracks through. The other big issue is conformity. We have built our education systems on the model of fast food. This is something Jamie Oliver talked about the other day. You know, there are two models of quality assurance in catering. One is fast food, where everything is standardized. The other are things like Zagat and Michelin restaurants, where everything is not standardized. They're customized to local circumstances. And we have sold ourselves into a fast food model of education. And it's impoverishing our spirits and our energies as much as fast food is depleting our physical bodies. I think we have to recognize a couple of things here. One is that human talent is tremendously diverse. People have very different aptitudes. I worked out recently that I was given a guitar as a kid at about the same time that Eric Clapton got his first guitar. You know, it worked out for Eric, that's all I'm saying. You know, in a way, it did not for me. I could not get this thing to work, you know. No matter how often and how hard I blew into it, you know, it just wouldn't work. But it's not only about that, it's about passion. Often people are good at things they don't really care for. It's about passion and what excites our spirit and our energy. And if you're doing the thing that you love to do, that you're good at, time takes a different course entirely. My wife's just finished writing a novel, and I think it's a great book. But she disappears for hours on end. You know this. If you're doing something you love, an hour feels like 5 minutes. If you're doing something that doesn't resonate with your spirit, 5 minutes feels like an hour. And the reason so many people are opting out of education is because it doesn't feed their spirit. It doesn't feed their energy or their passion. So I think we have to change metaphors. We have to go from what is essentially an industrial model of education, a manufacturing model, which is based on linearity and conformity and batching people. We have to move to a model that is based more on principles of agriculture. We have to recognize that human flourishing is not a mechanical process, it's an organic process. And you cannot predict the outcome of human development. All you can do is, like a farmer, is create the conditions under which they will begin to flourish. So when we look at reforming education and transforming it, it isn't like cloning a system. There are great ones, like KIPS, it's a great system. There are many great models. It's about customizing them to your circumstances and personalizing education to the people you're actually teaching. And doing that, I think, is the answer to the future, because it's not about scaling a new solution. It's about creating a movement in education in which people develop their own solutions, but with external support based on a personalized curriculum. Now, in this room, there are people who represent extraordinary resources in business, in multimedia, in the internet. These technologies, combined with extraordinary talents of teachers, provide an opportunity to revolutionize education. And I urge you to get involved in it, because it's vital not just to ourselves, but to the future of our children. But we have to change from the industrial model to an agricultural model where each school can be flourishing tomorrow. That's where children experience life, or at home if that's where they choose to be educated with their families or their friends. There's been a lot of talk about dreams over the course of this few days. And I wanted just to, very quickly, I was very struck by Natalie Merchant's songs last night, recovering old poems. I wanted to read you a quick, very short poem from W.B. Yeats, who some of you may know. He wrote this to his love, Maud Gonne, and he was bewailing the fact that he couldn't really give her what he thought she wanted from him. And he says, "I've got something else, but it may not be for you." He says this: "Had I the heavens embroidered cloths, enwrought with gold and silver light, of blue and the dim and the dark cloths, of night and light and the half-light, I would spread the cloths under your feet. But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams. And every day, everywhere, Our children spread their dreams beneath our feet, and we should tread softly. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Well, that's kind of an obvious statement up there. I started with that sentence about 12 years ago, and I started in the context of developing countries. But you're sitting here from every corner of the world, so if you think of a map of your country, I think you'll realize that for every country on earth, you could draw little circles to say these are places where good teachers won't go. On top of that, those are the places from where trouble comes. So we have an ironic problem. Good teachers don't want to go to just those places where they're needed the most. I started in 1999 to try and address this problem with an experiment, which was a very simple experiment in New Delhi. I basically embedded a computer into a wall of a slum in New Delhi. The children barely went to school, they didn't know any English, they'd never seen a computer before, and they didn't know what the internet was. I connected high-speed internet to it, it's about 3 feet off the ground, turned it on and left it there. After this, we noticed a couple of interesting things which you'll see, but I repeated this all over India and then through a large part of the world, and noticed that children will learn to do what they want to learn to do. This is the first experiment that we did. 8-year-old boy on your right, teaching his student, a 6-year-old girl, and he was teaching her how to browse. This boy here in the middle of central India, this is in a Rajasthan village where the children recorded their own music and then played it back to each other, and in the process they enjoyed themselves thoroughly. They did all of this in 4 hours after seeing the computer for the first time. In another South Indian village, these boys here had assembled a video camera and were trying to take the photograph of a bumblebee. They had downloaded it from Disney.com or one of these websites, 14 days after putting the computer in their village. So at the end of it, we concluded that groups of children can learn to use computers and the internet on their own, irrespective of who or where they were. At that point, I became a little more ambitious and decided to see what else could children do with a computer. We started off with an experiment in Hyderabad, India, where I gave a group of children, they spoke English with a very strong Telugu accent. I gave them a computer with a speech-to-text interface, which you now get free with Windows, and asked them to speak into it. So when they spoke into it, the computer typed out gibberish. So they said, oh, it doesn't understand anything of what we are saying. So I said, yeah, I'll leave it here for 2 months. Make yourself understood to the computer. So the children said, how do we do that? And I said, well, I don't know, actually. And I left. 2 months later, and this is now documented in the Information Technology for International Development Journal, their accents had changed and were remarkably close to the neutral British accent in which I had trained the speech-to-text synthesizer. In other words, they were all speaking like James Tooley. So you can, they could do that on their own. After that, I started to experiment with various other things that they might learn to do on their own. I got an interesting phone call once from Colombo, from the late Arthur C. Clarke, who said, I want to see what's going on. And he couldn't travel, so I went over there. He said 2 interesting things. A teacher that can be replaced by a machine should be. The second thing he said was that if children have interest, then education happens. And I was doing that in the field, so every time I would watch it and think of him.
Possible, and they can undoubtedly help people, because the children very quickly learn to navigate the web and find things which interest them. And when you've got interest, then you have education.
I took the experiment to South Africa. This is a 15-year-old boy.
This machine, I play games like animals, and I listen to music.
And I asked him, do you send emails? And he said yes, and they hop across the ocean. This is in Cambodia, rural Cambodia. A fairly silly arithmetic game, which no child would play inside the classroom or at home. They would, throw it back at you. They'd say, this is very boring. If you leave it on the pavement, and if all the adults go away, then they will show off with each other about what they can do, which is what these children are doing. They're trying to multiply, I think. And all over India, at the end of about 2 years, children were beginning to Google their homework. As a result, the teachers reported tremendous improvements in their English. Rapid improvement in all sorts of things. They said they've become really deep thinkers and so on and so forth. And indeed they had. I mean, if there's stuff on Google, why would you need to stuff it into your head? So at the end of the next 4 years, I decided that groups of children can navigate the internet to achieve educational objectives on their own. At that time, a large amount of money had come into Newcastle University to improve schooling in India. So Newcastle gave me a call. I said, I'll do it from Delhi. They said, there's no way you're going to handle £1 million worth of university money sitting in Delhi. So in 2006, I bought myself a heavy overcoat and moved to Newcastle. I wanted to test the limits of this system. The first experiment I did out of Newcastle was actually done in India, and I set myself an impossible target. Can Tamil-speaking 12-year-old children in a South Indian village teach themselves biotechnology in English on their own? And I thought, I'll test them, they'll get a 0, I'll give them material, I'll come back and test them, they'll get another 0, I'll go back and say, yes, we need teachers for certain things. I called in 26 children, they all came in there, I told them, look, there's some really difficult stuff on this computer, I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't understand anything. It's all in English, and I'm going. So I left them with it. I came back after 2 months, and the 26 children marched in looking very, very quiet. I said, well, did you look at any of the stuff? They said, yes, we did. Did you understand anything? No, nothing. So I said, well, how long did you practice on it before you decided that you understood nothing? They said, we look at it every day. So I said, for 2 months you were looking at stuff you didn't understand. So a 12-year-old girl raises her hand and says, literally, apart from the fact that improper replication of the DNA molecule causes genetic disease, we've understood nothing else. Took me 3 years to publish that. It's just been published in the British Journal of Educational Technology. One of the referees who refereed the paper said, it's too good to be true, which was not very nice. Well, one of the girls had taught herself to become the teacher, and that's her over there. Remember, they don't study English.
Where is it? Where is it? Neuron?
I've edited out the last bit where she said, when I asked where is the neuron, and she says, the neuron, and then she looked and did this. But her expression was not very nice. So their scores had gone up from 0 to 30%, which is an educational impossibility under the circumstances. But 30% is not a pass. So I found that they had a friend, a local accountant, a young girl, and they played football with her. I asked that girl, would you teach them enough biotechnology to pass? And she said, how would I do that? I don't know the subject. I said, no, use the method of the grandmother. She said, what's that? I said, well, what you've got to do is stand behind them and admire them all the time. Just say to them, that's cool, that's fantastic, what is that? Can you do that again? Can you show me some more? She did that for 2 months. The scores went up to 50, which is what the posh schools of New Delhi with a trained biotechnology teacher were getting. So I came back to Newcastle with these results and decided that there was something happening here that definitely was getting very serious. So having experimented in all sorts of remote places, I came to the most remote place that I could think of. Across the River Tyne, 5,000 miles from Delhi, is the little town of Gateshead. In Gateshead, I took 32 children, and I started to fine-tune a method. I made them into groups of 4. I said, you make your own groups of 4. Each group of 4 can use 1 computer and not 4 computers. Remember, from the hole in the wall. You can exchange groups. You can walk across to another group if you don't like your group, etc. You can go to another group, peer over their shoulders, see what they're doing, come back to your own group and claim it as your own work. And I explained to them that, a lot of scientific research is done using that method. The children enthusiastically got after me to say, now what do you want us to do? I gave them 6 GCSE questions. The first group, the best one, solved everything in 20 minutes. The worst, in 45. They used everything that they knew. News groups, Google, Wikipedia, Ask Jeeves, etc. The teacher said, is this deep learning? I said, well, let's try it. I'll come back after 2 months. We'll give them a paper test, no computers, no talking to each other, etc. The average score when I'd done it with the computers and the groups was 76%. When I did the experiment, when I did the test after 2 months, the score was 76%. There was photographic recall inside the children. I suspect because they're discussing with each other. A single child in front of a single computer will not do that. I have further results which are almost unbelievable of scores which go up with time. Because their teachers say that after the session is over, the children continue to Google further. Here in Britain, I put out a call for British grandmothers after my Kuppam experiment. Well, they're very vigorous people, British grandmothers. 200 of them volunteered immediately. The deal was that they would give me 1 hour of broadband time sitting at their homes 1 day in a week. So they did that, and over the last 2 years, over 600 hours of instruction has happened over Skype using what my students call the granny cloud. My granny cloud sits over there. I can beam them to whichever school I want to.
You can't catch me. You say it. You can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man. Well done. Very good. So we get
Power of the Supreme.
Back in Gateshead, a 10-year-old girl gets into the heart of Hinduism in 15 minutes. Stuff which I don't know anything about. 2 children watch a TED Talk. They wanted to be footballers before. After watching 8 TED Talks, he wants to become Leonardo da Vinci. It's pretty simple stuff. This is what I'm building now. They're called souls, self-organized learning environments. The furniture is designed so that children can sit in front of big, powerful screens, big broadband connections, but in groups. If they want, they can call the granny cloud. This is a soul in Newcastle. The mediator is from Pune, India. So how far can we go? One last little bit and I'll stop. I went to Turin in May. I sent all the teachers away from a group of 10-year-old students. I speak only English, they speak only Italian. So we had no way to communicate. I started writing English questions on the blackboard. The children looked at it and said, "What?" I said, "Well, do it." They typed it into Google, translated it into Italian, went back into Italian Google. 15 minutes later, next question, where is Calcutta? This one they took only 10 minutes. I tried a really hard one then. Who was Pythagoras and what did he do? There was silence for a while. Then they said, "You've spelled it wrong. It's Pitagora." And then, in 20 minutes, the right angle triangles began to appear on the screens. It just sent shivers up my spine. These are 10-year-olds. So you know what's happened? I think we've just stumbled across a self-organizing system. A self-organizing system is one where a structure appears without explicit intervention from the outside. Self-organizing systems also always show emergence, which is that the system starts to do things which it was never designed for, which is why you react the way you do, because it looks impossible. I think I can make a guess now. Education is a self-organizing system where learning is an emergent phenomenon. It will take a few years to prove it experimentally, but I'm going to try. But in the meanwhile, there is a method available. 1 billion children, we need 100 million mediators, there are many more than that on the planet, 10 million souls, $180 billion, and 10 years. We could change everything. Thanks. Thank you.
Let's talk about manias. Let's start with Beatlemania. Hysterical teenagers, crying, screaming, pandemonium. Sportsmania, deafening crowds, all for one idea: get the ball in the net. Okay, religious mania. There's rapture, there's weeping, there's visions. Manias can be good, manias can be alarming, or manias can be deadly. The world has a new mania, a mania for learning English. Listen as Chinese students practice their English by screaming it.
Change my life! I don't want to let my parents down. I don't ever want to let my country down. Most importantly, I don't want to let myself down.
How many people are trying to learn English worldwide? 2 billion of them. In Latin America, in India, in Southeast Asia, and most of all, in China. If you're a Chinese student, you start learning English in the 3rd grade by law. That's why this year, China will become the world's largest English-speaking country. Why English? In a single word, opportunity. opportunity for a better life, a job, to be able to pay for school or put better food on the table. Imagine a student taking a giant test for 3 full days. Her score on this one test literally determines her future. She studies 12 hours a day for 3 years to prepare. 25% of her grade is based on English. It's called the Gaokao, and 80 million high school Chinese students have already taken this grueling test. The intensity to learn English is almost unimaginable unless you witness it.
Perfect! 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 I want to speak perfect English. I want to speak perfect English. Perfect English. I want to change my life.
So is English mania good or bad? Is English a tsunami washing away other languages? Not likely. English is the world's second language. Your native language is your life, but with English you can become part of a wider conversation, a global conversation about global problems, like climate change or poverty or hunger or disease. The world has other universal languages. Mathematics is the language of science. Music is the language of emotions. And now English is becoming the language of problem solving, not because America is pushing it, but because the world is pulling it. So English mania is a turning point. Like the harnessing of electricity in our cities or the fall of the Berlin Wall, English represents hope for a better future. A future where the world has a common language to solve its common problems. Thank you very much.
I moved to America 12 years ago with my wife, Terry, and our 2 kids. Actually, truthfully, we moved to Los Angeles. Thinking we were moving to America, but anyway, it's a short plane ride from Los Angeles to America. I got here 12 years ago, and when I got here, I was told various things, like, Americans don't get irony. Have you come across this idea? It's not true. I've traveled the whole length and breadth of this country. I have found no evidence that Americans don't get irony. It's one of those cultural myths, like the British are reserved. I don't know why people think this. We've invaded every country we've encountered. But it's not true Americans don't get irony, but I just want you to know that that's what people are saying about you behind your back. You know, when you leave living rooms in Europe, people say, thankfully, nobody was ironic in your presence. But I knew that Americans get irony when I came across that legislation, No Child Left Behind. Because whoever thought of that title gets irony. Don't they? Because it's leaving millions of children behind. Now, I can see that's not a very attractive name for legislation. Millions of children left behind. I can see that. What's the plan? Well, we propose to leave millions of children behind, and here's how it's going to work. And it's working beautifully. In some parts of the country, 60% of kids drop out of high school. In the Native American communities, it's 80% of kids. If we halved that number, one estimate is it would create a net gain to the US economy over 10 years of nearly $1 trillion. From an economic point of view, this is good math, isn't it? That we should do this. It actually costs an enormous amount to mop up the damage from the dropout crisis. But the dropout crisis is just the tip of an iceberg. What it doesn't count are all the kids who are in school but being disengaged from it, who don't enjoy it, who don't get any real benefit from it. And the reason is not that we're not spending enough money. America spends more money on education than most other countries. Class sizes are smaller than in many countries. And there are hundreds of initiatives every year to try and improve education. The trouble is, it's all going in the wrong direction. There are three principles on which human life flourishes, and they are contradicted by the culture of education under which most teachers have to labor and most students have to endure. The first is this, that human beings are naturally different and diverse. Can I ask you, how many of you have got children of your own? Okay. Or grandchildren? How about 2 children or more? Right. And the rest of you have seen such children? Small people wandering about. I will make you a bet, and I'm confident I will win the bet. If you've got 2 children or more, I bet you they are completely different from each other, aren't they? Aren't they? You would never confuse them, would you? Like, which one are you? Remind me. Your mother and I are going to introduce some colour-coding system so we don't get confused. Education under No Child Left Behind is based on not diversity, but conformity. What schools are encouraged to do is to find out what kids can do across a very narrow spectrum of achievement. One of the effects of No Child Left Behind has been to narrow the focus onto the so-called STEM disciplines. They're very important. I'm not here to argue against science and math. On the contrary, they're necessary, but they're not sufficient. A real education has to give equal weight to the arts, the humanities, to physical education. An awful lot of kids... Sorry, thank you. One estimate in America currently is that something like 10% of kids getting on that way are being diagnosed with various conditions under the broad title of attention deficit disorder, ADHD. I'm not saying there's no such thing. I just don't believe it's an epidemic like this. If you sit kids down hour after hour doing low-grade clerical work, don't be surprised if they start to fidget, you know. Children are not, for the most part, suffering from a psychological condition. They're suffering from childhood, you know, and I know this because I spent my early life as a child. I went through the whole thing. And kids prosper best with a broad curriculum that celebrates their various talents, not just a small range of them. And by the way, the arts aren't just important because they improve math scores, they're important because they speak to parts of children's being which are otherwise untouched. The second... Sorry, thank you. The second principle that drives human life and flourishing is curiosity. If you can light the spark of curiosity in a child, they will learn without any further assistance very often. Children are natural learners. It's a real achievement to put that particular ability out or to stifle it. Curiosity is the kind of engine of achievement. Now, the reason I say this is because one of the effects of the current culture here, if I can say so, has been to deprofessionalize teachers. There is no system in the world or any school in the country that's better than its teachers. Teachers are the lifeblood of the success of schools. But teaching is a creative profession. Teaching properly conceived is not a delivery system. You know, you're not there just to pass on received information. Great teachers do that. But what great teachers also do is mentor, stimulate, provoke, engage. You see, in the end, education is about learning. If there's no learning going on, there's no education going on. And people can spend an awful lot of time discussing education without ever discussing learning. The whole point of education is to get people to learn. A friend of mine, old friend, actually very old, he's dead. That's as old as it gets, I'm afraid. So, but a wonderful guy, he was, a wonderful philosopher. He used to talk about the difference between the task and achievement senses of verbs. You know, you can be engaged in the activity of something, but not really be achieving it. It's like dieting. It's a very good example, you know. There he is, he's dieting. Is he losing any weight? Not really. Teaching is a word like that. You can say, there's Deborah, she's in room 34, she's teaching. But if nobody's learning anything, she may be engaged in the task of teaching, but not actually fulfilling it. The role of a teacher is to facilitate learning. That's it. And part of the problem is, I think, that the culture of, the dominant culture of education has come to focus on not teaching and learning, but testing. Now, testing is important. Standardized tests have a place. But they should not be the dominant culture of education. They should be diagnostic. They should help. You know, if I go for a medical examination, I want some standardized tests. I do. You know, I want to know what my cholesterol level is compared to everybody else's on a standard scale. I don't want to be told on some scale my doctor invented in the car. You know, your cholesterol is what I call level orange. Really? Is that good? We don't know. But all that should support learning. It shouldn't obstruct it, which of course it often does. So in place of curiosity, what we have is a culture of compliance. Our children and teachers are encouraged to follow kind of routine algorithms rather than to excite that power of imagination and curiosity. And the third principle is this, that human life is inherently creative. It's why we all have different resumes. We create our lives and we can recreate them as we go through them. It's the common currency of being a human being. It's why human culture is so interesting and diverse and dynamic. I mean, other animals may well have imaginations and creativity, but it's not so much in evidence, is it, as ours. I mean, you may have a dog, you know, and your dog may get depressed. You know, but it doesn't listen to Radiohead, does it? And, you know, sit staring out the window with a bottle of Jack Daniels. And you say, would you like to come for a walk? He said, no, I'm fine. No. You go, I'll wait, I'll go. But take pictures. We all create our own lives through this restless process of imagining alternatives and possibilities, and one of the roles of education is to awaken and develop these powers of creativity. Instead, what we have is a culture of standardization. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. Finland regularly comes out top in math, science, and reading. Now, we only know that's what they do well at because that's all that's being tested currently. That's one of the problems of the tests. They don't look for other things that matter just as much. The thing about work in Finland is this. They don't obsess about those disciplines. They have a very broad approach to education, which includes humanities, physical education, the arts. Second, there is no standardized testing in Finland. I mean, there's a bit, but it's not what gets people up in the morning. It's not what keeps them at their desks. And the third thing is, I was at a meeting recently with some people from Finland, actual Finnish people, and so somebody from the American system was saying to the people in Finland, what do you do about the dropout rate in Finland? And they all looked a bit bemused and said, well, we don't have one. Why would you drop out? If people are in trouble, we get them quite quickly and help them and we support them. Now, people always say, well, you know, you can't compare Finland to America. No, I think there's a population of around 5 million in Finland. But you can compare it to a state in America. Many states in America have fewer people in them than that. I mean, I've been to some states in America and I was the only person there. Really? Really, I was asked to lock up when I left. But what all the high-performing systems in the world do is currently what is not evident, sadly, across the systems in America. I mean, as a whole. One is this. They individualize teaching and learning. They recognize that it's students who are learning, and the system has to engage them, their curiosity, their individuality, and their creativity. That's how you get them to learn. The second is that they attribute a very high status to the teaching profession. They recognize that you can't improve education if you don't pick great people to teach and if you don't keep giving them constant support and professional development. Investing in professional development is not a cost, it's an investment. And every other country that's succeeding well knows that, whether it's Australia, Canada, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, or Shanghai. They know that to be the case. And the third is they devolve responsibility to the school level for getting the job done. You see, there's a big difference here between going into a mode of command and control in education. That's what happens in some systems. You know, central governments decide or state governments decide, they know best and they're going to tell you what to do. The trouble is that education doesn't go on in the committee rooms of our legislative buildings. It happens in classrooms and schools. And the people who do it are the teachers and the students. And if you remove their discretion, it stops working. You have to put it back to the people. There's wonderful work happening in this country. But I have to say, it's happening in spite of the dominant culture of education, not because of it. It's like people are sailing into a headwind all the time. And the reason I think is this, that many of the current policies are based on mechanistic conceptions of education. It's like education is an industrial process that can be improved just by having better data. And somewhere in, I think, the back of the mind of some policymakers is this idea that if we fine-tune it well enough, if we just get it right, it'll all hum along perfectly into the future. It won't, and it never did. The point is that education is not a mechanical system, it's a human system. It's about people. People who either do want to learn or don't want to learn. Every student who drops out of school has a reason for it, which is rooted in their own biography. They may find it boring, they may find it irrelevant, they may find that it's at odds with the life they're living outside of school. There are trends, but the stories are always unique. I was at a meeting recently in Los Angeles they're called alternative education programs. These are programs designed to get kids back into education. They have certain common features. They're very personalized. They have strong support for the teachers, close links with the community, and a broad and diverse curriculum, and often programs which involve students outside school as well as inside school. And they work. What's interesting to me is these are called alternative education. You know? And all the evidence from around the world is if we all did that, there'd be no need for the alternative. So I think we have to embrace a different metaphor. We have to recognize that it's a human system and there are conditions under which people thrive and conditions under which they don't. We are, after all, organic creatures. And the culture of the school is absolutely essential. Culture is an organic term, isn't it? Not far from where I live is a place called Death Valley. Death Valley is the hottest, driest place in America, and nothing grows there. Nothing grows there because it doesn't rain, hence Death Valley. In the winter of 2004, it rained in Death Valley. 7 inches of rain fell over a very short period. And in the spring of 2005, there was a phenomenon. The whole floor of Death Valley was carpeted in flowers for a while. What it proved is this, that Death Valley isn't dead. It's dormant. Right beneath the surface are these seeds of possibility, waiting for the right conditions to come about. And with organic systems, if the conditions are right, life is inevitable. It happens all the time. You take an area, a school, a district, You change the conditions, give people a different sense of possibility, a different set of expectations, a broader range of opportunities. You cherish and value the relationships between teachers and learners. You offer people the discretion to be creative and to innovate in what they do. And schools that were once bereft spring to life. Great leaders know that. The real role of leadership in education, and I think it's true at the national level, the state level, at the school level, is not and should not be command and control. The real role of leadership is climate control, creating a climate of possibility. And if you do that, people will rise to it and achieve things that you completely did not anticipate and couldn't have expected. There's a wonderful quote from Benjamin Franklin. There are three sorts of people in the world. Those who are immovable, people who don't get it, they don't want to get it, they're not going to do anything about it. There are people who are movable, people who see the need for change and are prepared to listen to it. And there are people who move, people who make things happen. And if we can encourage more people, that will be a movement. And if the movement is strong enough, that's, in the best sense of the word, a revolution. And that's what we need. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I have spent my entire life either at the schoolhouse, on the way to the schoolhouse, or talking about what happens in the schoolhouse. Both my parents were educators. My maternal grandparents were educators. And for the past 40 years, I've done the same thing. And so needless to say, over those years, I've had a chance to look at education reform from a lot of perspectives. Some of those reforms have been good, some of them have been not so good. And we know why kids drop out. We know why kids don't learn. It's either poverty, low attendance, negative peer influences. We know why. But one of the things that we never discuss, or we rarely discuss, is the value and importance of human connection. Relationships. James Comer says that no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. George Washington Carver says all learning is understanding relationships. Everyone in this room has been affected by a teacher or an adult. For years, I have watched people teach. I have looked at the best and I've looked at some of the worst. A colleague said to me one time, they don't pay me to like the kids. They pay me to teach a lesson. The kids should learn it. I should teach it, they should learn it, case closed. Well, I said to her, you know, kids don't learn from people they don't like. She said, that's just a bunch of hooey. And I said to her, well, your year is going to be long and arduous, dear. Needless to say, it was. Some people think that you can either have it in you to build a relationship or you don't. I think Stephen Covey had the right idea. He said you ought to just throw in a few simple things, like seeking first to understand as opposed to being understood. Simple things like apologizing. You ever thought about that? Tell a kid you're sorry, they're in shock. I taught a lesson once on ratios. I'm not real good with math, but I was working on it. And I got back and looked at that teacher edition. I taught the whole lesson wrong. So I came back to class the next day and I said, look, guys, I need to apologize. I taught the whole lesson wrong. I'm so sorry. I said, that's okay, Miss Pearson. You were so excited. We just let you go. I have had classes that were so low, so academically deficient that I cried. I wondered, how am I going to take this group in 9 months from where they are to where they need to be? And it was difficult. It was awfully hard. How do I raise the self-esteem of a child and his academic achievement at the same time? One year I came up with a bright idea. I told all my students, You were chosen to be in my class. Because I am the best teacher and you are the best students, they put us all together so we could show everybody else how to do it. One of the students said, really? I said, really? We have to show the other classes how to do it. So when we walk down the hall, people will notice us. So you can't make noise, you just have to strut. And I gave him a saying to say, I am somebody. I was somebody when I came. I'll be a better somebody when I leave. I am powerful and I am strong. I deserve the education that I get here. I have things to do, people to impress, and places to go. And they said, yeah. You say it long enough, it starts to be a part of you. And so, I gave a quiz, 20 questions. Student missed 18. I put a +2 on this paper and a big smiley face. He said, Miss Pearson, is this an F? I said, yes. He said, then why'd you put a smiley face? I said, because you on the roll. You got 2 right, you didn't miss them all. I said, and when we review this, won't you do better? He said, yes, ma'am, I can do better. You see, -18 sucks all the life out of you. +2 said, I ain't all bad. For years, I watched my mother take the time at recess to review, go on home visits in the afternoon, buy combs and brushes and peanut butter and crackers to put in her desk drawer for kids that needed to eat, and a washcloth and some soap for the kids who didn't smell so good. See, it's hard to teach kids who stink. And kids can be cruel. And so she kept those things in her desk, and years later, after she retired, I watched some of those same kids come through and say to her, you know, Miss Walker, you made a difference in my life. You made it work for me. You made me feel like I was somebody when I knew at the bottom I wasn't. And I want you to just see what I've become. And when my mama died 2 years ago at 92, there were so many former students at her funeral. It brought tears to my eyes, not because she was gone, but because she left a legacy of relationships that could never disappear. Can we stand to have more relationships? Absolutely. Will you like all your children? Of course not. And you know your toughest kids are never absent. Never. You won't like them all, and the tough ones show up for a reason. It's the connection, it's the relationships. And while you won't like them all, the key is they can never, ever know it. So teachers become great actors and great actresses, and we come to work when we don't feel like it, and we listen to policy that doesn't make sense, and we teach anyway. We teach anyway because that's what we do. Teaching and learning should bring joy. How powerful would our world be if we had kids who were not afraid to take risks, who were not afraid to think, and who had a champion? Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. Is this job tough? You betcha. Oh God, you betcha. But it is not impossible. We can do this. We're educators. We're born to make a difference. Thank you so much.
I'm a little nervous because my wife, Yvonne, said to me, she said, Jeff, you watch the TED Talks? I said, yes, honey, I love TED Talks. She said, you know they're like really smart, talented. I said, I know. She said, they don't want like the angry black man. So I said, no, I'm gonna be good, honey, I'm gonna be good. I am, but I am angry. And the last time I looked, this is why I'm excited, but I'm angry. This year, there are going to be millions of our children that we're going to needlessly lose. That we could, right now, we could save them all. You saw the quality of the educators who were here. Do not tell me they could not reach those kids and save them. I know they could. It is absolutely possible. Why haven't we fixed this? Those of us in education have held on to a business plan that we don't care how many millions of young people fail. We're going to continue to do the same thing that didn't work. And nobody is getting crazy about it, right? Enough to say enough is enough. So here's a business plan that simply does not make any sense. You know, I grew up in the inner city, and there were kids who were failing in schools 56 years ago when I first went to school. And those schools are still lousy today. 56 years later. And you know something about a lousy school? It's not like a bottle of wine, right? Where you say like 87 was like a good year, right? That's not how this thing, I mean, every single year, it's still the same approach, right? One size fits all. If you get it, fine. And if you don't, tough luck. Just tough luck. Why haven't we allowed innovation to happen? Do not tell me we can't do better than this. Look, you go into a place that's failed kids for 50 years, and you say, so what's the plan? And they say, well, we're going to do what we did last year this year. What kind of business model is that? Banks used to open and operate between 10 and 3. They operate 10 to 3. They were closed for lunch hour. Now, who can bank between 10 and 3? The unemployed. They don't need banks. They got no money in the banks. Who created that business model, right? And it went on for decades. You know why? Because they didn't care. It wasn't about the customers. It was about bankers. They created something that works for them. How could you go to the bank when you were at work? It didn't matter. Then they don't care whether or not Jeff is upset he can't go to the bank. Go find another bank. They all operate the same way, right? Now, one day, some crazy banker had an idea. Maybe we should keep the bank open when people come home from work. They might like that. What about a Saturday? What about introducing technology? Now, look, I'm a technology fan, but I have to admit to you all, I'm a little old. So I was a little slow, and I did not trust technology. And when they first came out with those new contraptions, these tellers that you put in a card and they give you money, I was like, there's no way that machine is going to count that money right. I am never using that, right? So technology has changed. Things have changed. Yet, not in education. Why? Why is it that when we had rotary phones, when we were having folks being crippled by polio, that we were teaching the same way then that we're doing right now. And if you come up with a plan to change things, people consider you radical. They will say the worst things about you. I said one day, well, look, if the science says, this is science, not me, that our poorest children lose ground in the summertime, right? You see where they are in June, you say, okay, they're there. You look at them in September, they've gone down. You say, woo. So I heard about that in '75 when I was at the ed school at Harvard. I said, oh, wow, this is an important study because it suggests we should do something. Every 10 years, they reproduce the same study. It says exactly the same thing. Poor kids lose ground in the summertime. The system decides you can't run schools in the summer. You know, I was wondering, who makes up those rules? For years, I went to the Harvard Ed School. I thought I knew something. They said it was the agrarian calendar and the people had, but let me tell you why that doesn't make sense. I never got that. I never got that because anyone who knows if you farm, you don't plant crops in July and August. You plant them in the spring. So who came up with this idea? Who owns it? Why did we ever do it? Well, it just turns out in the 1840s, we did have, schools were open all year. They were open all year because we had a lot of folks who had to work all day. They didn't have any place for their kids to go. It was a perfect place to have schools. So this is not something that is ordained from the education gods. So why don't we? Why don't? Because our business has refused to use science. Science. If you have Bill Gates coming out and say, look, this works, right? We can do this. How many places in America are going to change? None. None. Okay, yeah, there are two. All right? Yes, there'll be some place there because some folks will do the right thing. As a profession, we have to stop this. The science is clear. Here's what we know. We know that the problem begins immediately. Right? This idea, 0 to 3. My wife Yvonne and I, we have 4 kids, 3 grown ones and a 15-year-old. It's a longer story. With our first kids, we did not know the science about brain development. We didn't know how critical those first 3 years were. We didn't know what was happening in those young brains. We didn't know the role that language, a stimulus and response, call and response, how important that was in developing those children. We know that now. What are we doing about it? Nothing. Wealthy people know, educated people know, and their kids have an advantage. Poor people don't know, and we're not doing anything to help them at all. But we know this is critical. Now, you take pre-kindergarten. We know it's important for kids. Poor kids need that experience. Nope. Lots of places, doesn't exist. We know health services matter. People, we provide health services and people are always fussing at me about, because I'm all into, accountability and data and all of that good stuff. But we do health services. I have to raise a lot of money. And people used to say, when they come fund us, Jeff, why do you provide these health services? I said, make stuff up, right? I'd say, well, a child who has cavities is not going to be able to study as well. And I had to, because I had to raise the money, right? But now I'm older, and you know what I tell them? You know why I provide kids with those health benefits and the sports and the recreation and arts? Because I actually like kids, right? I actually like kids, right? But when they really get pushy, people really get pushy, I say, I do it because you do it for your kid. And you've never read a study from MIT that says giving your kid dance instruction, right, is going to help them do algebra better. But you will give that kid dance instruction and you will be thrilled that that kid wants to do dance instruction and it'll make your day. And why shouldn't poor kids have the same opportunity? It's the law for these children. So here's the other thing. I'm a tester guy. I believe you need data, you need information, because you work at something you think is working, and you find out it's not working, right? I mean, educators, you work, you say you think you got it, you're great, no, and you find out they didn't get it. But here's the problem with testing. The testing that we do, we're going to have our test in New York next week, right? It's in April. You know when we're going to get the results back? Maybe July, maybe June. And the results have great data. They'll tell you Raheem really struggled, couldn't do 2-digit multiplication, and it's great data, but you're getting it back after school is over. And so what do? You go on vacation. You come back from vacation, now you've got all of this test data from last year. You don't look at it. Why would you look at it? You're going to go and teach this year. So how much money did we just spend on all of that? Billions and billions of dollars for data that it's too late to use it. I need that data in September. I need that data in November. I need to know you're struggling, and I need to know whether or not what I did corrected that. I need to know that this week. I don't need to know that at the end of the year when it's too late, because in my older years I've become somewhat of a clairvoyant. I can predict school scores. You take me to any school. I'm really good at inner city schools that are struggling. And you tell me last year, 48% of those kids were on grade level. And I say, okay, what's the plan? What did we do from last year to this year? You say we're doing the same thing. I'm going to make a prediction. This year, somewhere between 44 and 52% of those kids will be on grade level, and I will be right every single time, right? So we're spending all of this money, but we're getting what? Teachers need real information right now about what's happening to their kids. The high stakes is today, because you can do something about it. So here's the other issue that I just think we've got to be concerned about. We can't stifle innovation in our business. We have to innovate. And people in our business get mad about innovation. They get angry if you do something different. If you try something new, people always ask you, oh, it's charter schools. Yeah, it's charter. Let's try some stuff. Let's see. This stuff hasn't worked for 55 years. Let's try something different. And here's the rub. Some of it's not going to work. You know, people tell me, yeah, those charter schools, a lot of them don't work. A lot of them don't. They should be closed. I mean, I really believe they should be closed. But we can't confuse figuring out the science and things not working with we shouldn't therefore do anything, right? Because that's not the way the world works. You think about technology. Imagine if that's how we thought about technology. Every time something didn't work, we just threw in a towel and said, let's forget it, right? You know, they convinced me, I'm sure some of you would like me, the latest and greatest thing, the Palm Pilot. They told me, Jeff, if you get this Palm Pilot, you'll never need another thing. That thing lasted all of 3 weeks. It was over. I was so disgusted I spent my money on this thing. Did anybody stop inventing? Not a person, not a soul. The folks went out there, they kept inventing. The fact that you have failure, that shouldn't stop you from pushing the science forward. Our job as educators, there's some stuff we know that we can do, and we've got to do better. The evaluation, we have to start with kids early. We have to make sure that we provide the support for young people. We've got to give them all of these opportunities. So that we have to do. But this innovation issue, this idea that we've got to keep innovating until we really nail this science down is something that is absolutely critical. And this is something, by the way, that I think is going to be a challenge for our entire field. America cannot wait another 50 years to get this right. We have run out of time. I don't know about a fiscal cliff, but I know there's an educational cliff that we are walking over right this very second. And if we allow folk to continue this foolishness about saying we can't afford this, so Bill Gates says it's going to cost $5 billion. What is $5 billion to the United States? What did we spend in Afghanistan this year? How many trillions, when the country cares about something, we'll spend $1 trillion without blinking an eye. When the safety of America is threatened, we will spend any amount of money. The real safety of our nation is preparing this next generation so that they can take our place and be the leaders of the world when it comes to thinking and technology and democracy and all that stuff we care about. I dare say it's a pittance. It's a pittance what it would require for us to really begin to solve some of these problems. So once we do that, I'll no longer be angry. So you guys, right, help me get there. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
So what is the high school dropout rate at Harlem Children's Zone?
Well, you know, John, 100% of our kids graduated high school. Last year in my school, 100% of them went to college. This year, seniors will have 100% graduating high school. Last I heard, we had 93% accepted to college. We better get that other 7% that's just how this goes.
And so how do you stick with them after they leave high school?
Yeah, well, you know, one of the bad problems we have in this country is these kids, these same vulnerable kids, when you get them to school, they drop out in record numbers. And so we've figured out that you've got to really design a network of supports for these kids that in many ways mimics what a good parent does. They harass you. Right? They call you, they say, I want to see your grades, how you do on that last test, what are you talking about that, you know, you want to leave school, or you're not coming back here. So a bunch of my kids know, you can't come back to Harlem, because Jeff is looking for you, right? They're like, I really can't come back. No, you better stay in school. But you know, I'm not kidding about some of this, and it gets a little bit to the grit issue. When kids know that you refuse to let them fail, right? It puts a different pressure on them, and they don't give up as easy. So sometimes they don't have it inside. And they're like, you know, I don't want to do this, but I know my mother's going to be mad. Well, that matters to kids, and it helps get them through. We try to create a set of strategies that gets them tutoring and help and support, but also a set of encouragements that say to them, you can do it, it is going to be hard, but we refuse to let you fail.
Well, thank you, Dr. Canada. Please give it up for him one more time.